rumors spreading round in that Texas town. Our next group, the industry associations. Chris, Tom, Rowley, and Russ, please head to the podium. We'll have all of our seats taken for this group, so. Now, Chris, did you want to do a small presentation explaining what your organization was about first, or?
I don't mind doing without it. I don't want to steal a march on anyone, so let's just let's go verbal.
Well, let's do it this way. Let's start down at the end to the guy who I think is from Jersey or something, judging by the accent. Please introduce yourself and give us a little insight into your organization, please.
Well, I'm Chris Aylett, and I'm Chief Executive of the Motorsport Industry Association, MIA, or Missing in Action, whichever one you feel is more appropriate, sometimes both. Funnily enough, we're just coming up to our 20th anniversary this year as an organization. It was founded in 1994 in the UK. We have around 400 corporate members. We have quite a few professional members and student members, but if you like, our main core of business is 400 corporate members. 25% of them are non-UK, 75% of them are UK companies. Those companies are internationally well known in terms of motorsport. They are specifically focused on just motorsport business, and the business is split very evenly between services, as we call them, which is, if you like, stadium operators, sponsors, sponsorship companies, financial companies, lawyers, you know, they hover around. We call them the carrion group. Sorry for throwing you in the room. And then the other half of and obviously rights holders and commercial operators, and we call that group the service group. And the other group is the engineering group, which, and collectively, if you like, our international head office is based in Motorsport Valley, the centre of Motorsport Valley in the UK, where we have 4,000 companies within 200 square miles specialising in motorsport, and we export 80% of our business. We're just about to announce the figures for the industry, but it's well in excess of $12 billion, well in excess of $12 billion. Formula One alone in the UK is worth $4 billion. So that's where the international headquarters was formed, and we do all the traditional stuff of trade associations and one or two things that aren't quite so traditional, as some of our friends know. But that's my introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Russ.
Hi, I'm Russ Dean. I'm General Counsel for SEMA. But before I go on, I'd like to recognize, not introduce somebody who's probably done more for motorsports than anybody else in this room. And by the way, if you like Corvette racing, you might want to thank Herb Fischel. SEMA, I'm sure most of the people in this room have heard about SEMA, but they probably think it's a trade show held in Las Vegas each year. Actually, it's much more than a trade show, although that's a pretty big part of our business. We've been involved in all types of activities, many of which protect and preserve the opportunities for the racing community. And so I'm not going to tell about all the things that SEMA does. I'd like to mention a few of the things they've done for racing and will do in the future. Certainly the most obvious and the most recent thing that SEMA has done for racing is buy IMIS and PRI, combine them and bring them back to Indy. That, I think, has been a major improvement in terms of this show and the opportunities for the people who will visit this show. Beyond that, we have been involved, for example, for years in land closure activity by the federal government. Now, I know a lot of you are simply short track, but one of the parts of our industry, obviously, is off-road racing and that type of thing, so it's very important that we deal with that. As a matter of fact, just recently, the Marines were planning on taking over an area in California known as Johnson Valley, which is where they hold the King of the Hammers, probably one of the most important off-road races in the United States. And so we jumped in with some other people, and we've stopped the process. They now have to go back and explain why the Marines need this property and that type of thing. So that's one of the things we've done. There are other things, and again, some of these don't relate directly to some of the people in this room, but for example, the Bonneville Salt Flats, which quite frankly is the root of an awful lot of racing, people who are involved in racing, has been under serious challenge for many, many years. And so SEMA has joined forces with the Save the Salt effort and is in the process of saving the Bonneville Salt Flats. And it's important. This is an iconic place. It's important, should be important to all racers. In any case, we, in terms of things that probably are interesting to the people here, that close to home, is we've been involved in noise control laws forever, and these are areas which have been putting pressure on racetracks. New Jersey is one. Actually, we just donated money to build a sound wall at Fontana for the drag strip at Fontana. We have been involved in all of these activities, and hopefully through some questions I can get into some more. In any case, SEMA, believe me, is interested in the racing community. I'm a racer, and we're all racers, and we all enjoy this sport, and you can trust me, SEMA will take care of it.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Weisenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Motorsports Association. We are a not-for-profit that works with the racing industry throughout the state of Indiana. Really, we've become a big networking group for our state. And whether it's Lucas Oil Raceway or Hoosier Tire or AFCO in Boonville, whatever it is, I usually get the phone call saying, we need help with this, and we don't know where to go. And literally from there, it's my job to help them connect the dots to whoever they need to get with. I will say another thing that we work with is a lot of the racers. During the U.S. Nationals, we actually hosted a DOT workshop, which a lot of the racers are, you know, obviously DOT is a four-letter word to them, not a three-letter word. And we had 104 racers show up, which is very important. It's the best attendance we've had at one of these. And we probably learned more from the bracket racers and the pavement stock car guys that were there that night than we had in the past 5 years that we've done these. Out of that meeting, Kyle Fickler from Weld Racing, who's on the board of SEMA, invited me to come out to SEMA, and I actually met with SEMA's government affairs team, some folks that actually work with Russ and for Russ. And honestly, SEMA is now going to be working, I think, with the IMA and David Miller at the NCMA on some DOT issues to try to help our racers as well. So it's another way that SEMA is trying to work with the motorsports industry. We could not do it without their help. They've got, 4 or 5 full-time lobbyists in D.C. We don't have that, so we can be great partners together. So we look forward to working with SEMA on that. But again, we've worked with Chris and the MIA on several events. Raleigh, obviously, from the state of Indiana, is on my board of directors. But for us, it's very simple. Whatever we can do to help the motorsports industry in the state. And really, we've had a new tagline for us, and that's put the fun back in racing. Because the last 8 years haven't been a lot of fun for a lot of racers, and it really should be fun. That's why we're all in it, because we have that passion. But let's put the fun back into racing.
Raleigh.
Well, thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Raleigh Helmling, and I was a businessman who was afflicted with the illness that we all seem to have, and that was auto racing. And for about 25 years, I was a participant as a car owner in all series of USAC racing. Shortly after that, I became the president and chief executive officer of USAC for 6 years. And upon leaving that at the end of 2007, I was invited by then Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana to come on board and go to work for the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is the Department of Commerce for the state of Indiana. And the governor's mission was very simple. He recognized the value and the brand of what auto racing and the motorsports industry does for the state of Indiana. And he asked me to come on board to join the team to build and develop the racing and the motorsports industry in Indiana. So we've been doing that now for about 5 years, and be more than happy to share with you some of the accomplishments and some of our failures that we've had here in Indiana. But first and foremost, it's my pleasure to welcome PRI and all of you back home again in Indiana. And I can assure you we are very very grateful to being able to bring the racing industry back to the racing capital of the world.
We tried to get Jim Nabors in to sing that song, but it was a little out of our pricing point.
Can I make one point?
Sure.
Tom reminded me when he was talking about DOT, and we do a lot of work with DOT, of another situation involving trucks. One day I was minding my own business, as I often do, and I answered two phones simultaneously. One was the snake in one ear, Kenny Bernstein in the other, and they're both yelling at me, and the reason is they're standing around some border of California, and they can't get their trucks into the state. And most of you guys know in those days Conrad Clement would build anything you want. And so if one racer had a 50-foot trailer, obviously somebody else wanted 53, and then it just kept going. In any case, the long and the short of it is, we called Sacramento, we got our Sacramento people working on it, and 15 minutes later the CHP, very disgruntled I might add, were told to let them go.
Very nice. And guys, being from the different industry associations, I don't think I have to remind you that you can chime in at any time, even though I present a question to one particular person. But here we go. Raleigh, you mentioned PRI coming back home here to Indy. What kind of an economic impact is that for Indianapolis?
Well, it will probably bring about $45 million into the Indianapolis community just this weekend. But that also goes ahead and supplants our motorsports industry in Indiana. Tom and I were very involved in a recent economic development study that was primarily done by Purdue University, and we identified 23,000 full-time jobs, Indiana jobs involved in the motorsports industry. I wish we could say it's a $12 billion industry like Chris can. We're between $3 and $4 billion of economic value annually brought to the state of Indiana.
And Tom,
you can say any number you like, that. It'll still be good.
And Tom, when you and I were discussing this on a radio show earlier this year, you were almost shocked that some of the politicians, for instance, around the area there that with Hoosier Tire, didn't even know that Hoosier Tire was in her district.
Yeah, that's a challenge, I think, for all of us to educate our legislators on our industry and how big it is and how it truly affects the communities that we're all in. Whether you're short track, big track, team, manufacturer, supplier, doesn't matter. So we actually, the IMA, we host several different legislative tours, we call them. And we'll have Allison's let us borrow a bus from the Allison Transmission people, and we pick 3 or 4 shops, and we try to do, if we can, a nice little mini tour, 3 or 4 different types of companies to educate these legislators on what type of facilities that our industry has, big and small. And we've been to manufacturing facilities, and we've been to Ganassi's shop and John Force's shop. I mean, but they have no idea. And I love when we're on that bus. We have a motorsports caucus for Indiana, and the head of that caucus one night asked the state representative from Lakeville, Indiana, who do you have in your district there that is part of the motorsports industry? And this state legislator said, I have no idea. Well, that's where Hoosier Racing Tire is from. And so that's a sad story. And so that's when I knew that we had more work to do. We have to continue the education to our state legislators of how important our industry is, so when our industry needs some help at the State House, we have a little bit more oomph. And I think the study that we did with Purdue, recognizing the 23,000 jobs that average $62,000 a year, I mean, this is the type of facts that we need to have a little bit more, I think, influence at the State House when we go.
Tom, our State House is the Houses of Parliament. We're only as a country, we're only small as one of your states. So it's the same kind of problem we have there, that they're very quick to attend every Grand Prix and drink the champagne. They always accept that, but they do damn all for it. And funnily enough, and I give you a tip, because I think the weakness lies with our members, not with the legislature. They've got a country to run or a state to run, and we've got an industry to run. So we regularly send to all our members, believe it or not, the details of their representative, and we say, call them on this issue, contact them on that issue. Have you been in touch with them about the tax laws? And strange enough, they then say, oh, well, if you think it's a good idea, I'll write to them or I'll call them. And so we're actually feeding them, feeding the companies and saying, this is the guy that can, or girl that can change your business. And we've had a tremendous, then suddenly they wake up. Because, of course, we realize that the weakness of all of them is they just want votes. They could give a damn for motorsport. They just want votes. And if you think out how they buy votes, it's education, it's health, it's all these issues. So we just hustle them on those points so they know we're putting them in touch with votes. And it's just votes. It's cynical, but that's all they care about in England.
By the way, one of the things, following on what Tom said, SEMA has created in Washington a caucus which consists of members of Congress and members of the Senate. And we are in contact with those people on a continuous basis. We've added to the number tremendously over the years. And these are the people we go to first if we have an issue at the federal level. Interestingly, we have the same thing. We have a caucus in every state where we have representatives there that know our industry, are prepared to take a call. We have somebody that our members can call. And by the way, we also have the SEMA Action Network, which is basically the car clubs in the United States. Tremendously effective organization. About 6,000 clubs, Chris, isn't it? 6,000 clubs. And by the way, Chris Kirstein, the president of SEMA, just walked in.
Hello.
In any case, so we have those car clubs, and those people are incredible when it comes to influencing members of Congress, because they write really nasty letters and they're local, and so it gets their point across. We've also used the resources of Source Interlink, all the different publications, to where we're able literally to communicate with 20 million enthusiasts in 24 hours. Now, it takes another 3 months to get the magazines out, but their internet sites are there. So we're very conscious of being able to influence what members of Congress and what members of the state legislature do, and these are the steps, some of the steps we've taken to do that.
You know, something I think we need to consider is a real sense of urgency. And this certainly supports what you're saying, is a good example, both community, state, and even on the federal level, is Indiana. What is the biggest business in the state of Indiana? It's the state of Indiana. And so we have our largest business that every 4 years or 8 years not only gets a new chief executive, gets an entirely new board of directors and a complete new management team. So when you try to relate that to business in general, it's a very ineffective system, but it's what we have to work with, and that just illustrates the intensity of what we have to do to educate our legislators to make sure they're aware of what our industry is and what our needs are.
Real quick, I would say that when I was at SEMA this year, it's the first time I'd been in 8 years, and as I met with the legislative team to talk about how they might be able to help us and the NCMA and the industry across the country, the one thing I asked is, hey, how much is membership? Because I'm not a member, and I kind of felt obligated. Man, I should be a member, right? Chris and I, thank you, Russ, I know. Chris and I ask for help all the time, and we always say, are you a member? And they say,
Chris,
no.
are you a member?
Of what?
SEMA.
No, I'm not.
I am. It was the best $150 I spent this year, and that's what it was for me to join SEMA.
We'll do a deal.
We'll do a trade out.
Expensive, I know of you.
No, yeah. Chris, we're not inexpensive, we're just great value.
But again, I would say that for you that think that all the different tools that SEMA has to help any of us in this room with our business, I would recommend you look into their site. I don't know if they have a booth here or not, but I would definitely try to find out on how you could become a member of SEMA as a corporation and as an individual. Again, it's best $150 that we're going to invest as a small one-person not-for-profit, which is what we are.
Chris has been another regular guest on Track Source Radio, and we've talked a lot about trade development, which your organization is doing a wonderful job on. When you're trying to sell trade development to especially the politicians, is it all about the jobs? Is that the way you sell this?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed my life to appear so regularly on your program, you know, like, you got to say that, haven't you? I get 2 phone calls a year from it. No, anyway, it's great fun. I enjoy appearing on it. When I took on the MIA 15 years ago, I'd been a president of a big of the sports industry around the world for many years. And you have to find something that people want from a trade body. This is not true of today's SEMA, but it certainly was when I met Chuck Bloom in the early days and go back even further. You have to find a reason for your existence. There are a couple of things you might find interesting. I interviewed over 120 companies just on my own ticket. I went around the country and talked to people and said, what do you do? What is motorsport? One of the things I found and will never forget is I said, in your future business strategy, what are you thinking of for the future? And almost every one of them started off by saying, well, when we win the championship this year, what we're going to do is build a new factory or a building. I say, good. And when you don't, because most don't, no, but we will. And I drove and said, these guys are nuts. There is no recognition that most of them are going to lose. They're absolutely none. So I found one piece of work to do, which was giving them a strategy, a business strategy, because they clearly had just this, correctly, they had this fixation to supply the winning part to the winning team, and boy, then we make a lot of money. But they had no other business strategy. So if I have a raison d'etre, a reason for being in the world is to give these guys some strategy. And it was strange that I said, and how are you going to develop your business? And of course it said again, well, when we win the championship, we'll supply the rest of the field. And if you don't, what are you going to do? And so that we have, I must admit, since then we have found our strength was to take them internationally and help them look outside their traditional marketplaces. So in other words, the supply chain, and we give the same advice whether someone's a member or not, to be honest, because what we're all into is trying to grow the cake bigger. And if the cake's bigger, whether they're members of SEMA or IMA or our organization, they'll get a slice of the cake, the good ones will. So we've helped them go around the world and built up new geographic markets in some pretty wild territories, to be invited to the new racetrack opening in Mongolia, which happened to me a year or so ago. I thought it was a joke. And the phone rang and they said, will you be coming next Thursday? What, Mongolia? You are kidding me. Where the hell is Mongolia? But anyway, I was told it was a great party, and I missed something special, but I kept my life. They race llamas. So we go to some strange geographic markets around the world, and wherever you go, somebody races a car. That's the exciting part. They may race a rather lousy car, and they may not drive it very quickly, but they're going to crash it, and they are going to need spare parts. And so there's new business. So that's the geographic. And then I say about 5 years ago, we realized that if we took the capability of motorsport, which is you guys in the room and your members, and took them to new sectors as well as geographic markets. So we've been tremendously successful introducing people into the field of defense and, strangely enough, into the field of automotive based on energy efficiency, which is where I met my friend Herb and Sandy many years ago, that to make motorsport capability relevant to the mainstream automotives through the words of energy efficiency or green, that's been tremendous, and that's all business development. So that offsets the bet that they might not win the championship. That's all I'm doing, because there's a good chance you won't.
And Raleigh, we discussed a little bit before the show about how it's not just a company that makes parts for motorsport. They might make parts that can be impactive in other areas of the economy too. Is that another selling point that you guys like to point out to Indiana companies?
Well, certainly, and from an economic development standpoint, what trips the trigger is new jobs and new investment. And one of the things that we continue to find is that motorsports firms do need to diversify. They need a backstop. As we know, this industry surges, it ebbs and flows. And so to take off on what Chris is saying, it's very important that they are able to position themselves where they can work with other industries. And again, the automotive industry is very strong in Indiana. We are the third largest producer of automobiles in the United States, and we have a very significant parts supply system to back that up. And so one of our keys is trying to relate the motorsports industry and the way it works to the rest of the automotive industry. And we're also tying that together, as Chris mentioned, with our aerospace industry, which is growing, and also with the defense industry. And we have a very vibrant defense industry in Indiana too. And the more we can tie those similarities together to build economic advantages for the state, the better off we're going to be. And again, I just can't emphasize enough, when you're looking at opportunities, incentives, grants, anything that might be available to help you build your business, the real key that everybody understands is new job creation and new investment brought into the community or the state.
This next question, I'm going to start out with Chris and come down the whole way, because we have representatives from 4 great organizations. That's not just me shoveling it, as I am sometimes accused of doing. It's the results that you guys have shown, and it shows with your results that you're great organizations. So Chris, the easy question for you: what makes a great organization? What is it? What is the objective of a great organization, and is it grassroots support, is it lobbying, or is it all of the above to be successful?
Yeah, well, a great organization servicing the motorsport industry is really quite difficult to encapsulate, because the industry, this is only the industry I know, which, if you like, is the international. It's not necessarily, although we have offices, we have 3 offices in America. Jeremy Byrne at the back of the room is director of North America. He's based near Detroit. And we have Don Taylor on the West Coast in Los Angeles and Michael Bailey down in Charlotte. I have to say that we learned pretty quickly that this industry has a very short lead time for all its issues. This is not something that they throw in 6 months' time. They tend to need you to put a fire out straight away. So we coined the phrase that our agenda is set every morning by our membership, which I think is what really you're saying. That phone call sets the agenda of the day. So it's getting close to the industry, getting close to the people, talking to them, meeting most of our members, running events where we listen, and we find the pieces we can add. We don't interfere with them winning or losing a championship, but we do put them in touch. I like what Tom said. I have 9,000 international motorsport contacts on my Rolodex, or whatever the hell they call it in a computer these days. And so I like to think we're the go-to people. So that you say, if you want tickets to Mongolia, you now know, just give me a call, and I'll get you out there. You may not come back, so it's kind of being close to the people, listening to them, and immediately applying your limited resource, because it's not unlimited, to answer that question. We say we're an extra pair of hands for the people in the industry, because we're not a fat industry. Motorsport doesn't carry a lot of waste labor. We find they're pretty lean. They want a fast response. So it's fast response for what's happening right now.
Russ?
I guess with an organization, we're thinking mostly motorsports organization, one of the things is having a program to resolve the issues of the members. More importantly, to have the capability of reaching beyond what is easy to find really difficult projects that are important to the members. And then, of course, Chris is here, the leadership of the organization to basically make that happen. And quite frankly, I'm very proud to be with SEMA, because over the years, SEMA has stretched. It's gone into areas that were perhaps very, very difficult for it. And it's taken on those jobs not because they were easy, but because they were tough and they were important for our industry. And we've had great leadership in being able to accomplish those goals.
Tom?
I think for the IMA, it's truly all the above. I mean, it's because we have so many small grassroots racers, because we do have so many of the IndyCar and NHRA teams based here in Indiana, because we do have so much manufacturing, we have to figure out how we can help all of them in some capacity. And, you know, we do a lot of seminars and workshops, whether it's the Affordable Health Care Act or labor law, social media. I mean, so for us, we're always trying to figure out every year, man, what can we do to help them this year? And I will say for us, it's truly trying to stress the diversification. I mean, Chris, you talk about it now. I know you guys push the whole aerospace and defense as well. You know, where we've seen a lot of companies in motorsports go to the defense side, we've actually done the reverse as well, though. We had Raytheon, who has a big facility here in town, who had contract with the military on some F-16 components. Their contract was up. They could take it to wherever they wanted to. I knew some people that worked there. I met with them. I said, listen, I'm not an engineer. I'm just a stupid sales guy, but I think IndyCar and NHRA should look at this. And so we had a meeting at our office and called in IndyCar teams, and we called in the IndyCar technical people, same with NHRA. And right now, IndyCar is working with Raytheon on utilizing 2 components from the F-16 fighter jet on the new IndyCar. And again, trying to find ways to make our industry healthy. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what whatever that is, how can we help make them healthier?
Raleigh?
Well, you have to remember, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. I think the key point is, I mean, they're speaking from an association standpoint, but the key point is connecting the dots. And, you know, if we don't, no one else will. And bring it back into my perspective of grants and incentives and jobs and investment. Last weekend, I was going somewhere, I had the radio on, and they were talking about this new billion-dollar stadium that they're building in Minneapolis, and how the state of Minnesota is putting $500 million into that. And we think about, you know, our racetracks today, and you know, at lunch we heard Mark Miles talking about the program that the state of Indiana is doing with the Speedway and some other things that have happened, and some unique things that we've been able to do here with some of our local industry. But what's really key is we've got to get the message out about the value of motorsports and what it does not only for the sporting community, but it does much, much more. Now, we've got this big building about a quarter of a mile south of here that we were fortunate enough to hold the Super Bowl in, and it's a tremendous asset to the state of Indiana and to our community. And they fill it every Sunday whenever there's a game. But you have to think, using football as an example, yes, it's a sport. Yes, there's tremendous entertainment value, but there's no technology there, in my opinion, because I don't think that football's changed in the last 50 years. But look at all the changes that have happened in racing, in motorsports, and in the automotive industry that happens almost annually. So racing brings a significant value above and beyond sports. And if we don't tell our decision makers that, no one else will. And we have to recognize the difference between motorsports, other sports, what it contributes, the technology, what it brings to industry, and the social values that applies to what we do. And I think that's something from an industry standpoint, from a participant standpoint, from an from the way we make our living. We've got to communicate that message.
Yeah, I'll just make the point that always intrigues me when I've just heard my colleagues and myself replying to your question. We're very much focused on the business of, if you like, the supply chain of motorsport. I always am concerned who's selling motorsport, because I don't know who the hell's doing that, frankly. And I know we're supplying it. And now is not the time to open that debate, but it does worry me that it's such a complex sport. And as I say, my background was in the sports industry, and the industry of golf, for example, spent a lot of money making sure there are a hell of a lot of golfers. And they funded that by levying golf balls and levying golf, and they raised a lot of money, and they kept reinvesting to get more and more consumers. And I don't know why, in all the years now that I've been in motorsport, whoever I touch, they say, well, that's the promoter's job. And I know there are some promoters in the room, and the promoter says, no, I promote an event, I don't promote a sport. And I do what, and I speak to the FIA, which is, if you like, who's creating the demand here? And I don't know. So it was funny, because all of our answers were very well thought through, but they were the supply chain. They were, who's making it popular?
And Chris has worn all those hats because you've been a driver, a team owner, a promoter yourself. So I think that helps you better in this role as well.
I know how bad I've been.
Do we have any questions out here? I've got one more for you, and then I'm going to turn you over to Tim. We have a silo mentality in this sport where we're all doing our own little thing and we don't cross over very well. I'm going to start out with Tom on this and work my way up to the national and international levels. How can we avoid that on the organizational basis of learning how to work together better, where the state organizations work good with the national and work with the international, because we're all in this game to get the same result. We might be fighting a few turf wars, but as you've said, getting along with the North Carolina group is good for your state as well. How can we all learn in the racing industry to work better together?
I think we'll struggle in a way with that because we're also competitive, whether it's team versus team or track versus track, sanctioning body versus sanctioning body, broadcast partner versus broadcast partner. It's competition after competition after competition. So I struggle when we host events for the short weekly racing tracks in Indiana to try to get them to show up and talk about either what their issues are, what their success are, because they don't want to let their secrets out of the bag. I'm like, really? Come on. I mean, we're here to help each other, and if the other tracks around you are healthy and there's more race teams and race cars out there, and the car count's up, isn't that good for all of us? So I know for us, a barrier has been the whole competitive side from track versus track. And I think, again, it's tough because we'll have race teams call us up to want us to help them with sponsorship, and that's not what we do. I'm not going to be a sponsor hunter. I live that life, and I'll pass. And I would say that it's really challenging when we have 4 or 5 IndyCar teams that are members, and they come to us for help. I got to make sure they feel comfortable sharing with me what they need help with, that it's going to stay with me. And again, I would say for us the challenge is the whole competitiveness right now. And I don't know, I just keep trying to build relationships with them and build the trust up and see where we can go from there.
Russ?
First, SEMA has no competitors, so we're, I guess, ahead of the game in that regard. With regard to the type of the institutions that you referred to, we spent a tremendous amount of effort to build up our relationships with state organizations, with our clubs in the states, obviously our relationships in Washington. As a matter of fact, one of the major efforts that SEMA's doing right now is working on getting kids to be more interested in cars, which obviously leads them to racing. I'm sure all of you are aware of the problems we're having because of the graying of the industry. And so SEMA has taken that on as a major project to try to find ways to encourage kids to come back to the car and obviously to racing. And we do this every day.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I've been coming to the States since I was in my 20s, which was in the days of the black and white movies. And I kind of worry that you're such a big local market, and motorsport pervades every part of that society, that you are definitely insular, and correctly so, because you are the world's biggest market for motorsport. So I do get that feeling that if you could somehow unify and work together, and I was just musing on the fact with Chris in the room that this step of SEMA getting involved with PRI, it could well be a moment of leadership for SEMA to help the motorsport sector in the United States, somehow unifying some of these state rivalries and separate industries. You've got 3 big clusters, the West Coast, the Indianapolis area and the Charlotte area, in terms of industry, but every state you go to has got some motorsport. And I've always felt it's kind of fragmented. It's kind of easy for me because we just have a little tiny island, and you get wet when you get out of it because it's surrounded by water, and it's only a few hours from one end to the other. So I know when I'm out of my marketplace, but you guys, it would be really valuable. And I'm meeting with some SEMA guys. One of the things that I think we found in the UK and in Europe, and we certainly found some years ago, was to do some market research and claim the high ground for the whole national industry and say the national industry is worth this amount of money. And I know, Chris, I'm meeting your guys this week. We would love to be involved in that, and make them understand they're part of a family that is that national map. And then you send that map out and you say, Mr. Motorsport in Utah, this is how much you're playing on the game, and you're playing on the game. And just by mapping it, you give them this feeling of some sense. We did the same in Europe. We did Germany, Italy, and France, and the UK. And we've done 1 or 2 other countries as well, and each one of them then kind of has a respect that they're not isolated, they're part of a family because they're on the family map. But as I say, it's easier for me because we wander the world. We export most of our business out of the UK, so every country we go to, we're trying to do business and help those people. And I will say to America, it's funny, we have a show, much smaller show, in January in the UK, and I've got some government money to help American companies come to that show, and I can't give it away. I cannot get American companies to come over, and they say, well, what am I going to sell? Well, what the hell do you know until you get there? I mean, just go and go and do some international trade. You're a fantastic resource. But I don't blame you for staying home because you've got such a great domestic market. But it's such a shame because I think it would add a lot if American motorsport exported somewhere around the world and made more effort into it. And then I think this family and this bond would happen much stronger. But I do say I think SEMA and PRI coming together is a great moment for someone to step up the leadership of the national scene. And if we can play any role in that, Chris, then it would be a privilege. Because there's no question I want to see a strong American marketplace. Not to come and rape it and steal business, but I want you guys to come over and join the international market.
And Raleigh, I think you've kind of got to see firsthand how within the government agencies, different industries fighting for different scraps from the same pie, instead of understanding if we make more pies, everyone gets ahead. How has that influenced, what kind of advice that you've had to learn to get along with all these people within the government framework could we maybe apply to the racing industry so we can all get along a little bit better and work together?
Heck, when I was president of USAC, that was a more political job than what I have right now. First of all, I think, the one thing that you always hear about motorsports is desire and dedication. That's a key phrase, and there's a lot of credibility to that phrase. Another thing we have to remember in the United States is we have the most fragmented diverse motorsports industry in the world, because we have all the different segments that contribute to it. People say, okay, who's Indiana's competition? Is it North Carolina? Everybody thinks, we're in this fierce competition with Charlotte. It's Indianapolis versus Charlotte. That really is not the case. There are three clusters of motorsports in the world. The center of the UK, the Motorsport Valley, Charlotte, and the Indianapolis area. And we all have, for the most part, our little piece of the pie because of the diversity. So we really don't compete. The Indiana area is primarily open wheel racing and drag racing. Of course, we all know Charlotte is NASCAR, and we know the road racing Formula One influence in the UK. So I think the key is not necessarily competing against each other. There's no sense for us to beat each other up. It's to cooperate and try to build the sport.
Very good. Tim, do you want to add a few comments?
Just everything. One of the key goals of what we've done here for this event is pretty much, it's on display right here. We've seen some incredible consolidation in the industry. There's competition in our sport, there's competition for the business, but if we can come together as a whole, that way we're going to move forward in a unified way. And that was actually part of when we designed these icons for what we do in the sport in there. That typifies what we have in this group of really, really talented people. And Chris Aylett and what they have done at the MIA is an example that we are following, hopefully here in the States, for that. So, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. A couple of shout-outs. We've got Chris Kirsten and Bill Miller from SEMA here. So why don't you raise your hand if you're still over there.
This is a great opportunity to sit in today, and because we've been drawn into the conversation a little bit, I thought I'd take a chance to say hello. And also reflect just a little bit on some of what you said there. It's really nice for us to come here and listen. Think of SEMA as a resource. It's kind of, I think for some folks who've been around the SEMA world, you know us pretty well. For some of the folks in the PRI world and circle track racing, maybe not so much. And SEMA is a tremendous resource. So we come here to listen and understand a little bit more, and hopefully you guys can bring us some feedback. The panelists here are talking a little bit about potential roles that an outfit like SEMA might be able to play, and I think there are some things that we can do. We need to hear a little bit more from you guys what those things would be, where it would be best to apply those resources. One of the things that came up in the meeting there, or in the conference discussion, was this matter of what makes a great organization. And then how would you bring these diverse groups together to work on things together? And I think that while there are those issues that come up that you might call our differences, our competitive, there are common issues. There are those things that if you do a good job of understanding what your purpose is in coming together, and then sifting through to find the common things, then you can make some difference. And that's where SEMA could apply some of the resources that we have to try to do something. So it's a little bit about goal setting, a little bit about sifting, identifying some common things, and so you guys can help us learn and understand both ways. Great piece of the coming together of PRI with so thanks for that.
And a big thanks to our industry association experts. Thank you very much.
Rumors spreading round in that Texas town about the shack outside the game. And you know what I'm talking about. Just let me know if you wanna go to that whole mile on the range. They got a lot of nice girls.